Hello everyone, my name is Francisco Rodriguez and my presentation is entitled Nightmares, the Absolute Origin. I will be discussing three psychological subfields in relation to nightmares, which include sensation and perception, developmental psychology, and social psychology. So, before I begin, I wanted just to give a little background knowledge and just mention some key pointers. So, nightmares are known as disturbed dreaming that can cause strong emotional responses from the mind, such as fear and anxiety, which ultimately awakens an individual and generally is experienced during REM sleep. They are often indicators and or manifestations of life stressors, as well as forewarnings of an imbalance in the body that may produce disarranged behaviors, thoughts, and attitudes. Nightmare severity refers to the level of extremity or seriousness produced by a nightmare. Nightmare frequency refers to the amount of incidence and reoccurrence or simply how much a nightmare is experienced. Nightmare distress refers to the mental strain and suffering during the state of wakefulness after having experienced a nightmare. Now, what has previous research studies have said about this? Well, they have suggested that nightmares are developed due to feelings of concern, trauma, incidents, or complications in development, which, according to Simard, Nielsen, Tremblay, Boivin, and Montesplesser in 2008, and Sandoval, and Bodies in 2016, have all concurred with this. However, no studies have focused on the links between nightmares and from early to late adolescence and adulthood. So, by taking nightmare distress, frequency, and severity into account, may assist in developing better understanding of this link, particularly among the various subfields of psychology, which help with identifying nightmare causation and provide explanation of nightmare after effects in relation to the lifespan. In any case, this paper investigates the relationship between nightmares across the lifespan while placing an emphasis on nightmare distress, frequency, and severity by utilizing research in sensation and perception, developmental, and social psychology. Sensation and perception relates to the provided research because its mechanisms differ from people to people, and because of this mass difference, nightmare experiences are also diverse. Not only that, but sensory and perceptual concepts add credibility and enhancement by assessing different measures listed in the studies below, and they help explain the feelings and reactions and or symptoms of nightmare sufferers. I will be discussing the two most important studies in my research. To begin with, Meade, Jenham, Petito, and Coopers in 2014 conducted a study that assessed the dreams and nightmares of people who were born blind, people who became blind later on, and non-blind individuals. The study was developed because the researchers wanted to know how vision loss affects dream perception, and they found that a lack of sensory and perceptual skills, such as being blind, affects the dreaming process, as well as when and how long they were blind being crucial factors, and that the trauma of losing vision actually produced nightmares. Another important study was conducted by Carr and Nielsen in 2017, in which they integrated the findings of pre-existing literature that provided support towards the conception that people who are prone to experience nightmares may be characterized by sensory processing sensitivity, basically being more sensitive to emotional experiences and stimuli. The study was developed because previous research on nightmares has generally foregrounded on the nightmare itself and its negative after effects, and yet they wanted to have all these other knowledge of integrations and just combine them to find a clearly overview. And they found that sensory processing sensitivity, increased sensitivity to sensory and emotional stimuli are all factors that can actually enhance the stress in people who are nightmare prone. So, all in all, the sensation and perception portion found that sensory and perceptual components such as being blind and increased sensitivity are receptive traits to nightmare experiences, and that negative perceptions cause nightmare sufferers more distress overall. Moving forward, this portion of the presentation is focused on the developmental psychology component. This relates to the provided research because the development of nightmares, not only at an early age, but whose nightmares follow in later years, is needed to know the precise origin. In addition, nightmare distress, severity, and frequency may differ during different age values, and integrating that research into this present study enhances credibility as well as add support to hypotheses and proposals overall. I will be discussing the three main studies in the developmental psychology portion of this presentation. The first study was by Roberts, Lennings, and Hurd in 2009, in which they investigated whether bad experiences such as death and illness are linked to a change in anxiety, which is attributed to nightmares from early to late adolescence. And they found that nightmare distress and frequency are linked in terms of experiencing negative life events in early to late adolescence. We also have one by Tori Nielsen, in which they examine research based on sleep, dreams, and nightmares as they relate to adversive childhood experiences. They found that those who have childhood adversive experience undergo more frequent nightmares because of the trauma, and that the nightmare severity depends on the trauma. We also have a study conducted by Thompson, Larea, Lewis, Zammit, and Fisher, as well as Wake in 2015, in which they investigated the relationship between nightmares, night terrors, and sleepwalking in childhood. And they found that those who experience nightmares at an early age and nightmares follow through are more prone to more severe parasomnia. So, all in all, the developmental psychology portion found that nightmares distress and nightmare frequency are linked when experiencing negative life events early to late adolescence, and are more prone to parasomnia later on in life. And childhood trauma and adverse experiences are related to nightmare distress, and they experience more frequent nightmares because of the trauma. But it's also important to keep in mind that the nightmare severity is going to vary in regards to the trauma being difficult. This fraction of the presentation will be focused on social psychology. This relates to the provided research because previous studies have found that an individual's social environment can affect neural functioning, which in turn may produce nightmares. Also, social support, social relationships, and life stressors may also be used to explain nightmare causation and how they influence disturbed dreaming by utilizing personality and learning characteristics among nightmare sufferers. I will be discussing the two main studies in this portion of social psychology. The first study was by Stein et al. In 2012, in which they investigated the role of abuse and social support in nightmare distress, nightmare frequency, and self-reported measures of insomnia. This study was developed because past research had stressed the need for sleep improvement interventions in victims of sexual abuse, and possessing more knowledge regarding the role of social support and abuse in sleep disturbances, such as nightmares, leads to better comprehension of their relationship, and actually potentially accelerates early recognition of interventions. They found that social support has an influential link to sleep disturbances in abuse victims, and that the more someone is abused, the more likely they are to experience nightmares as well. We also have the study by Loveland, Cook, Kaplan, and Wallowitz in 1990, in which they assessed the effects of social stressors on nightmare and dream content, frequency, and prevalence. This study was developed because of research that had integrated a contribution between dreams and nightmares to the stress process. In other words, what mediates and moderates stress. This allowed researchers to examine these non-waking cognitive responses to numerous types of life stressors. Not only that, but previous studies have revealed that frequent dreams and nightmares are reason alone for the cause of underlying stressors, which in turn was also used as a determining factor for developing the study. They found that life stressors such as negative life events are related to nightmares and symptoms of anxiety and depression. And the more stressors that are experienced, the greater nightmare frequency there will be. All in all, the social psychology fraction found that the more abuse there is, the more nightmares are experienced, and that the more stressors there are, the more frequent nightmares will be as well. Ultimately, while taking into consideration all the factors of sensation and perception, social psychology, and developmental psychology, it can be concluded that they are all independent yet interdependent on one another on the basis of nightmare frequency, nightmare severity, and nightmare distress. The findings suggest that nightmare causation is linked to negative life events and childhood adversity. And they also suggest that impairments in the sensory and perceptual components, such as being blind, for example, make people more prone to nightmare experiences. They also suggest that the more grave or the extreme life stressors may be, how bad they are, in other words, the greater amount of nightmare frequency, severity, and distress, especially as they enter early adolescence and adulthood. So, future studies should focus on whether the decrease of sleep quality and quantity originating from negative sleep properties, sleep fragmentation, or simply avoiding sleep can have an impact on the emotional reactions after waking up. This would actually further add to pre-existing literature and provide a better understanding of nightmare function, cause, and consequence. Future studies should also approach more research on learning and on social psychology points of references just to identify risk factors for nightmares from an early age to later on in life. Future studies should also take a biopsychosocial approach to further understand nightmare causation and its relation across the lifespan, specifically how genes, social environment, and psychological struggles influence nightmares in terms of distress, severity, and frequency. Thank you very much for listening to my presentation in a very monotone voice. I appreciate the time that you took to view this, and I hope you enjoyed it as much as I have, even though my voice may say otherwise. I'm just a little sick. But overall, thank you so much, and I hope everyone excels wherever they may be going after their senior 7. Thank you.